Hello there, and welcome to the Mindfulness Hub. I'm Asia. I'm a mindfulness coach, mindfulness teacher, and creative arts therapy facilitator. And in this space, I share what I practice. In today's video, we'll be looking at a really intriguing psychological experiment which shows the impact of conditions, stressful conditions, non-stressful conditions, and also we'll be looking at the importance of nurturing and soothing ourselves throughout the day to manage stress and anxiety, especially when we're feeling stressed and anxious. If this is something that interests you, if you think you might benefit in any way, then I invite you to join me, and when you're ready, let's begin. So, researchers Friedman and Forster conducted an experiment on a group of students. There were two groups in the experiment, group 1 and group 2, and both groups were instructed to find a way to take a mouse out of a maze. And it was the kind of maze that you would find at the back of a cereal box, for example. So it wasn't a real mouse. However, the two groups were told different things about the conditions of the task. Group 1 was told that if they got the mouse out of the maze, the mouse would get to have a piece of cheese. Group 2, on the other hand, was told that if they didn't get the mouse out of the maze, the mouse would be eaten by an owl. So 1 is a condition of threat. If the mouse doesn't get out of the maze, the mouse will die. And for group 1, the condition was there was a possibility of reward. If the mouse gets out of the maze, it will have a piece of cheese. This is important to keep in mind because when the students were asked to perform the task, both did it relatively easily because it was an easy task. However, the after effects were measured and the two groups were asked to perform an unrelated creative task. And what they found was that group 1, the ones who'd been told that the mouse would get a piece of cheese, was a lot more playful, experimental, and creative in the second task than group 2. Not just that, but group 2 was 50% less creative than group 1. So the results are really interesting because what happened was that in group 2, the pathways of the brain connected to threat became activated the moment they were told that there would be consequences, negative consequences, if the mouse didn't get out of the maze. So threat was present for them. It was at the forefront of their awareness. On the other hand, in group 1, the reward pathways of the brain were activated because they knew that if they found a way for the mouse to get out of the maze, the mouse would get a piece of cheese. What we notice is that group 2 isn't able to think creatively, and actually after those stressful conditions, the inability to think creatively and find solutions persists. In group 1, the reward pathways of the brain allow them to think creatively, finding solutions to problems, being playful and experimental. So there are a few takeaway points from this experiment. Lesson 1 is that when we're stressed, when we're in conditions of stress, our body tenses up as a result of our mind tensing up because the threat pathways of the brain become activated. which means that the brain is focused on surviving, and there is very little space for creativity when we're focused on surviving. So, when in our daily lives we're experiencing stress, we need to keep in mind that we're unable to think creatively, to come up with solutions, and to connect with our external environment, with others, as much as we would when we're not stressed. The second lesson that we learn is that when stress is present, we're a lot more reactive. Our focus is on getting things done and pushing through. And because of that, we're a lot less resourceful. So, mindfulness allows us to recognize when we're getting stressed. For me, for example, when I get stressed, I put at the bottom of my priority list things that nourish me. What we do is that we begin to recognize when we begin to feel stressed and what we do because of the stress, any habits or behaviors, and what we can do to regulate ourselves and manage the stress in those circumstances. The third lesson that we learn is about mindset and how we think about situations. When we think about something from the perspective of, I've got to do this, the threat pathways of the brain become activated, and we're much more likely to just want to get through it, push through it, and there's very little space for creativity there. On the other hand, when we're in the mindset of, I get to do this, we're in a much more open state. And what happens is that we're a lot more likely to consider different possibilities, to come up with solutions, to ask for help, and to think creatively. And then the fourth takeaway from this experiment is that it is so incredibly important to manage stress and anxiety by doing one small activity each day that nourishes and soothes us. Why is that? It's because when we find time to do things that we enjoy, whether it's spending time in nature with pets, loved ones, or friends, dancing, exercising, listening to music, journaling, or doing whatever you do to soothe yourself. We create that space in our lives, however small, to regulate our stress levels so that we can gain some control over our well-being. What happens when we're stressed is that we feel like we're pulled in many different directions. We feel like we're losing our center. And when we pause, check in with ourselves, and do something, however small it may be, to nurture ourselves, then we are actually gaining autonomy, some agency over what we choose to do next, which ultimately can benefit our well being in the long term. So I invite you to reflect on this. If you have any comments, thoughts, or insight about this, I would love to hear from you. in general, my invitation is to consider perhaps the things that nourish you. What brings you back home to yourself when you're feeling pulled in many different directions? Also, what do you do when you're stressed? What's your habitual way of behaving? Do you withdraw, or do you find you're more reactive, or do you snack more? Do you spend more time on screens? These are things to simply keep in mind. I remember that while this is an opportunity for reflection, it is by no means an invitation to fix or figure out or judge yourself in any way. It is simply an open invitation to be curious as best you can about what you do when you're stressed and what you can do to take care of yourself in those moments. So, thank you so much for listening.